Welcome to the Culture of You, meaningful dialogue with me and my favorite people. What's up, y'all, and welcome to the Culture of You. I'm your host, Karen Hewitt, and today I have the pleasure, and I'm gonna just let you watch her dance while I talk about her. I hope that happens. So we have Elsie Johnson, writer, entrepreneur, activist, public speaker, fantastic public speaker, facilitator, curator of sacred space, joy, healing, and most importantly, the founder and CEO of Zora's House. I would like to call my friend, culture creator, to the stage right now. Elsie, what's going on? Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thank you so much. That was such a good bio. I often feel really uncomfortable when people are reading my bio, which is weird because I wrote it. But I feel like, I don't know, I just love the way that you just described me and my work. So thank you. That was a little gift, I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, you know, for a while I admire you from afar. Just kidding.
I told her not to
I
make it weird, y'all.
I
She did not promise that she wasn't going to
can't.
make it weird.
I
So,
I actually said I will not promise you that. I
okay,
cannot
good.
promise you that. Yep. No, won't promise you that. It will probably get weird, hopefully the best ways. But no, I'm just so grateful for your work, for your I too am a transplant here in Columbus, and I love to see the work that you're doing. I love to be a part of it. No surprise, I'm on the board.
Hey.
I I love the work you do, and I love you as a person. And why did you say yes to coming on this show?
Yeah, so there were a couple different reasons. This has actually been a pretty busy season for me. And so it was really hard. At first, I didn't just say yes, I said not right now.
Mhm.
And so, one, I really appreciated the grace with which you received that message. I think you being willing to be like, that's fine. When we gonna do it? It doesn't have to be right now, like when feels spacious. So that was one reason that I was just like, man, like I can give a not right now and still be received really gracefully and lovingly. And it makes me feel more comfortable being in
Mhm.
collaboration with you. And two, because you a fool and I really didn't know what you were going to be talking about on this podcast. And I didn't read, I don't know if you sent me questions ahead of time, because if you did, I didn't read them. So this is going to be really off the dome, and I love talking to you. I love your intellect. I love the way you think. And I just imagine that we're going to have a really good conversation.
I love that. I sent if for anybody that knows, if you join my podcast, if you're on my podcast, I sent probably a 2-page email at the beginning and I say, pardon the words, but if you're interested, keep reading. You know what I mean? So I make the ask first. But yeah, I definitely ask a lot of questions and there are a lot of words. So I love Off the Dome. That's great. I'm sure it's gonna be funny and informative and like meaningful and all that kind of stuff. So the first question for those who don't know Elsie Johnson, or maybe even Zora's House, and they should be clicking on links right now as we talk about this, explain your vibe, your culture that you create professionally and personally.
Yeah, thank you. So you've been listening to me for all of about 30 seconds. You've probably picked up a little bit on my vibe. I think that but it's really weird to put into words, actually. So thank you for this question. I would say that, I recently had a couple folks tell me that, they saw me in community before they ever met me, and that they were really um taken by the fact that I came off just very authentic in the spaces that I was in. And that has not always been true of my leadership. It's something that has really evolved, and I think it has especially evolved in my work with Zora's House. If you're not familiar with Zora's House, we are the only co-working space and leadership incubator in the state of Ohio created by and for women and gender expansive people of color. Our mission is really to help folks activate their leadership, creativity, activism, entrepreneurship. Like, we quietly want women of color, gender expansive folk of color to like take over the world, and really thinking about how we can be instrumental in that work of connecting them more deeply with themselves, with each other, with resources and opportunities. So I think a lot of my evolution into my own vibe and how I show up has really happened in the work of creating Zora's House and imagining the kind of world that I want to show up to.
Mhm.
And so imagining a world where Black women can show up very honestly and very transparently, can say when something is hard, can own up to making a mistake without feeling shame or like now they don't deserve to be in a space. A world where there is joy, where the work that we do, the spaces that we're in fill us up and it's not just places that we're pouring into. So those are the things that I think really accompany the culture and the community that I try to create. And because this work can be really hard, I think my vibe is just wanting to have fun while I do it, wanting to be deeply in community, and have the people who I collaborate with, who I'm in community with, feel like friends and feel like meaningful folks in my life.
Mhm. I love that explanation, and I believe it to be true. I've witnessed it. I'm thinking about some of the things you were saying around, people being able to show up and make a mistake, or uh, just the joy and like the proving that we have to do, like thinking about all the proving that we have to do. And so, you're in Columbus by way of
I met a
where'd you
boy.
go? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so we know the story. Met a boy, had a baby, here you go. So that's what's happening. And you're in Columbus and you're building this beautiful community. And many might ask, because this is like on the culture creation level, this is like top tier culture creation. Like you got a brick and mortar space, you got work doing it. Where do you find your, I don't know, like accountability partners? Where do you find your support? Where do you find like your restoration? Do you get restoration? What's that looking like for you right now?
Yeah, that was like 7 questions in one, and I love
Yep.
them all because they're all really important and meaningful. So I'm going to try to address each one. So one, the act of culture creation. I love that that's really what this podcast is all about. I think that even for you to be able to reflect back to folks who are in the work that they are creating culture, I don't often think of it quite that way. Although I know that like we are trying to create a little microcosm of the world that we want to live in. And I feel like, that was something that I knew that I was always trying to do. But I feel like my accountability and both my accountability and my affirmation has really come for the people from the people who are the folks that Zora's House is meant to be in support of. And so it's those folks when they have the words to describe something that I don't have the words to describe. So in the very early days of Zora's House, we had a member come to the space and, she told me, she was like, yo, LC, she was like, so I was like, she heard me describing the space.
Mhm.
And then she was like, LC, the way I always describe the space, I just told I always say, imagine your favorite coffee shop and your homegirl's house had a baby. And that's Zora's house.
That's
And
real.
for real. And like we use that all, it's like on our website, it's like on some of our like, posters and marketing material. And in those moments of being affirmed by somebody else seeing and articulating and mirroring back to me what it was that I've been trying to create that I don't even have words for. And
Mhm.
I think that's a big thing for folks who are creating culture is where are we finding those mirrors, like those
Mhm.
folks who can name, those storytellers who can name, put words to the things that we're doing, who can mirror back to us what that culture is, what it looks like, what it feels like. We had another Zora's House member we asked her like, hey, if you were to like write about your experience of Zora's House, and she said, Zora's House teaches you how the world is supposed to treat you. And she was like, it's a public space where you can practice being who you want to be everywhere else in your life. And I remember again just being like, damn, y'all out here, you're blowing my mind because
Mhm.
yes, I'm like creating and working to really cultivate this feeling, but to have somebody be able to really, in their own words, um, say, hey, this is what this is for me, or this is what this has looked like for me, and let me really name for you like what I'm feeling in this space that has been cultivated. That has been both accountability and affirmation, and it really comes from the people that we want to serve, that we want to be in community with. When
Mm-hmm.
they can say things in their own words, not like describe back to you what you told them, but say it in their own words, it's like, oh, it's real now. Like that came from you. That didn't come from me. That came from you.
Mm-hmm. The mirrors. I love that around the mirrors, and you are finding all the mirrors. So we have Jump at the Sun Project, which is Zora's House 2.0. If y'all don't know, on Summit Street, Zora's House exists. And co-working hours, all kinds of things that are there, zorashouse.com. Get your link in. And then with the mirrors, I'm thinking about how like exhausting this could be, right? What are the challenges that you have faced, and maybe even new challenges from like the first brick and mortar to the second? What are you experiencing, and what would you want? What support do you need? I'm like, what are you experiencing?
Oh man. So it's honestly like I feel like there are like layers and categories of challenges. Like it's not even just like, oh, what challenges? It's like, oh, which type are you talking about? Are you talking about like logistical challenges, like the logistics of trying to build a 10,000 square foot space when you have no construction experience and the market is absolutely wild? Are you talking like leadership challenges where you're really thinking about how am I showing up in these spaces where I am not an expert in certain parts of the work, but still being able to really stand proud in the places where I do have expertise, um, figuring out what vulnerability looks like and asking for help looks like. Those are all very real leadership challenges. Are you talking about management challenges in that my team
Ooh.
has grown from just myself to a team of 7 in 3 years? And really thinking about what that has looked like to make sure that I am also creating the culture for the staff here at Zora's House that we want our members to experience. I've been in too many nonprofits where they have all of these grand visions and missions, and then they treat people, I don't know if I can curse, they don't treat them nice. That's all that I'm just gonna say, that they
You
don't
can,
treat them nice.
mhm.
Um, you know,
You
or
can
you
cuss, by the way.
okay, good. I didn't know. And
Oh
Karen
yeah.
was looking at me like, I'm like, girl, can I or not? What's
Yeah.
okay. So like it's all of those layers. And then just talking about just kind of like I put rest in its own category, like the exhaustion that comes with doing this type of really large scale projects. And I don't know everybody who's listening right now, but I'm also a mom, I'm a wife, a partner, I'm a caretaker to a parent who's chronically ill. And I'm a mom of little children. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, when we just talk about navigating the exhaustion of it all sometimes
Mhm.
and really trying to figure out, you kind of asked what does restoration look like, and I was about to just be like, mind your business. um, because I'm just like, ah, it doesn't look like anything. Because it's real. It's real trying to find those moments, those spaces,
Mhm.
those places. And honestly, sometimes not even wanting to hear from people wwho love me, like, hey, have you rested lately? Because I'm like, damn, the answer is
Come look
no.
at this calendar.
Right, right.
Take
Like,
these kids.
right. So yes, it's almost like I said, it's categories of
Mhm.
challenges and figuring it out like how to navigate each of those categories.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's that category itself, sometimes it's intersecting with another type of challenge.
Mhm.
And it is very hard. It is very hard. And I feel like it's so important to talk about that, talk about like how hard it is. And
Mhm.
I'll use this like quick example, which has really had me thinking. So everybody's been at the Beyonce concert. I did not go to the Beyonce concert. Beyonce is fine. I like Beyonce. Don't come for me. I did not go to the Beyonce concert. But I do remember that like a couple years ago when she performed at, I feel like it was
Nationwide.
No, it was at Coachella.
Oh.
And she did that little documentary where she was talking about, it was like the homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And so she did this whole documentary. She had just had the twin. She was like breastfeeding. She did this whole documentary about like getting prepared for Coachella and what that experience was like for her. And it was really interesting because she was talking about how she had pushed herself so much. Like she had pushed herself, she was exhausted, she was postpartum. And then it turned out to be this like phenomenal, like everybody was talking about it. It was a slam dunk. She killed it. And I remember there was a moment in the documentary where she was like, I wouldn't do it again. She was like, I would actually make a different choice. And it
Mm-hmm.
was really interesting to me because it's so rare that we hear Black women tell a story of, I started, it was super hard. I pushed through everything. Like I sacrificed so much and then I made it. And usually that's the end of the story. And it's really
Right.
rare that we hear like, I wouldn't do that shit again. If I could go back, I just wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I loved that moment. It really made me so much more of a Beyonce fan, even just to hear her reflect like that. Um, and it's something that I think about sometimes where, there are moments in this campaign where I know something really amazing is coming and is happening. And even in doing the work, it has been transformative for myself, for my team, for the folks that we work with, and will be transformative in community. And sometimes I'm really honest and I'm like, y'all better be glad I can't go back. Like I've come too far. Cause listen, I don't know if I'm
Just throw it
noble.
all away at this point.
Okay. If I could walk away, would I?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes like I really grapple with that
Mm-hmm.
question because sometimes stuff is just really fucking hard. And it's like if I could walk away for this project, would I? Maybe.
I
I
was having a
can't, so I'm not going to, but
Yeah, you're
maybe.
good. You're good. Everybody can relax. Um,
Funders
LC
out
will
here.
just keep not sleeping.
Call her.
It's fine. Um, donate to the freaky. No, no. um, I think about that, and when I think about, I was in a therapy session, and I was talking about like, oh, I had a family member who was about to pass, and I was like, I know what to do when somebody passes. Like, I know to cancel all my meetings. I know to, take the time, and people will be like, oh, sorry about your loss, all that kind of stuff. But my therapist was like, I'm gonna encourage you, and I know you started doing this a little bit too. I'm gonna encourage you take to cancel meetings when there's no reason, but that you need some time. You need
Mm.
to move. Like look at your day one day and just be like, I could really use a day, right? And start moving meetings. And um, I don't think we don't talk about how hard it is. And we don't talk about like, oh, I wouldn't do that again, or I would do something different. I have a couple experiences where I'm like, I couldn't even enjoy it because it was so hard getting there. It's like that race that you pass out at the line at the finish line. You know what I mean? You're like, what happened? Like, was I present? And so that coming back to presence is really actually hard to do because you're forward facing. You're also leading a team. So yeah, I can understand that conversation. And then I'm like, okay, what's your approach? Like, do you hype yourself up? Like, does it depend on the situation? What's going on?
Yeah, it's such a really good question. And I think it does depend on the situation. I think sometimes it's a little bit of um sometimes it's a little bit of just approaching it as I'm learning. Like this is a learning moment. Learning is uncomfortable sometimes,
Mhm,
and this can be hard and maybe not the way that I would do it in the future. And that's also okay for me to be in a moment where I'm like, I wouldn't do this again, or I wouldn't do it like this again, to still be able to like make my way out of that and feel
mhm,
like, but yo, like I really learned something. I feel like I learned something about myself. I learned something about my leadership. One of the things that I think has been really, really that has made this year feel very hard for me is that oftentimes my way of working, I need a lot of like flexibility to like
mhm,
work on the things that are like calling to me at any given time. Creatives understand this. Like, that you can't just like create on demand. It's like when
mhm,
I'm feeling creative, I need to be able to work on this. When I'm feeling, strategic, I need to be able to work on this. And alongside of that, I think as a person who has a very like rich emotional life and a very like deep and sometimes complex like familial life, I also appreciate a lot of openness in my schedule to be able to navigate around my emotions so that I can still show up in the way that I need to. Well, one of the reasons that this year has been so hard is because I have had a lot more external meetings this year than I have ever had in my career. Because of the fundraising,
Mm-hmm.
because of needing to be in weekly meetings with our contracting team, um, we have staff meetings, and even those are internal like check-ins with staff. I have so many more meetings, and many of my meetings are external, and they're meetings that
Mm-hmm.
like we've been waiting on for 2 months. And so what will happen is in a previous time of life, I'll have a really rough morning. I'll talk to my parent that's sick and be really navigating like a wave of grief around that. And I'll kind of say, you know what, I'm gonna push this check-in back, but I also like don't have a lot on my schedule this morning. So I'm about to just like lay in bed and read a book for a little bit. And then I'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to pop back up in the afternoon and kind of get some work done. I may work a little bit late, or tomorrow I'm gonna like go hard because I took this time to decompress. What's been hard is all that still happens, but this year there's been a lot more like it doesn't matter. Like, get up. You have to go to this meeting. Like,
Mm.
fucking suck it up. Like, wash your tears. You got to go. Like, it has not,
Get
there has
this
not
money.
felt like, right. And I think it's also like the number of, and the scaffolding of the external meetings that are harder to cancel. So it will be like, damn, we've been waiting on this meeting for a couple months, or this meeting is like 5 different people, and it took a lot for us to collaborate schedules. So feeling a lot of times that, oh, I had this really hard day or this really emotional conversation, or I'm just feeling really insecure about something in my own leadership, and it's kind of like there's no grace. It's like it does not matter. You need to show up, put a smile on your face, be the LC that everybody wants you to be, and like make it happen. And I that has felt really bad.
Mm.
That has probably been like the thing that has made this year feel so hard. It's been less about the amount of work or the type of work. Some of that's challenging too, but the thing that's made it feel the hardest is that I don't feel like I have spaciousness to navigate my own needs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when my time has already been claimed and I feel like I have to show up in a certain way. And
Mm-hmm.
that's been really devastating to me this year. So my approach is, well, I'm gonna make it through this year, but next year ain't gonna be like this. And it's really just
Yeah.
kind of been a learning, a moment of like, I can't go on like this. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is not the way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are we going to shift things?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
But
yeah.
people only want to see your face though. Like that's the hard part is like when Zora's house, like people automatically want to hear you, and you have a ton of champions in the community, but people want to talk to you. If it's about this brick and mortar space, this new space, if it's about, funding really for forward facing messaging to anybody that isn't in Zora's house, they want to talk to you. So I don't know when that time will end for you, but I'm hoping it's close to this year, end of
Well,
year.
I think it's less about what I've really been realizing is that it's less about feeling like, oh, you know, I need to just I can't go back to the time when I was nobody knew who I was in this community, and I was just like incognito, and it was fine. I had like 2 meetings a month, right? I can't go back to that time. However, what I have realized are like, what can I do to like have those meetings on my calendar in a way that still provides me with some spaciousness. Like, yes, there will still be days where it's like, damn it, it just so happens I just had this really hard call with, a family member, and I still need to go do this pitch.
Mm-hmm.
But, we've talked about like I was talking to some folks on my team, my executive assistant had mentioned like we have tried like every quarter to do like 2 weeks of like no meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
we have meeting free weeks, like 2 weeks per quarter. That may sound so small, but we tried it one time when I was really at my wits' end. I was like, I just can't. I feel like I'm so emotionally drained from all these meetings. I haven't been able to do anything creative.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to like recharge my introvert self. Like
Mhm.
I'm done. I'm spent. And it was like an emergency, like Hail Mary. I was like, no meetings. Like I canceled all of my external meetings, my internal meetings. I was like, I'm not meeting with anybody. And that reset was so powerful for me, and to be like, wow, like 2 whole working weeks, my calendar was completely clear. And, even integrating the way that I approach my calendar versus imagining that like I'm just gonna live in this world where like nobody ever wants to talk to me anymore. That's like my fantasy. But it's not a fantasy that is gonna come true.
That's so real. Yeah.
I'm a little
Um,
introvert that nobody believes is an introvert, which also makes it
yeah.
hard. People are like, "Girl, you're not an introvert." And I'm like, I literally am. And also, how would you know?
We call this the juice, and we turn it on when we have to have the juice on. And I noticed that because I was doing some public speaking, I was doing, meetings. I have a full-time job that literally faces the community and our brand. It takes our brand into the community. Um, and obviously doing all this work and facilitation and stuff. And it was just like, all right, so I need to plan, at least if I can't have a day off after a facilitation or a training or something like impactful, especially a full day, I need to at least have a day of no meetings, right? The next day or the rest of the week or whatever that looks like. And that comes with a certain amount of like, I don't want to say privilege, but it's like it's an honor to be able, like, your executive assistant like handled it, like when we were talking about when we were going to meet. And I saw like on Monday or Tuesday she took herself off the invite, and I was like, oh no. And then I was like, okay, that's just her. Like, it's cool. It's cool. Cause I was like, I don't know when I'm gonna see LC again. Like, I don't know. I don't know when I'm gonna see you again. But I love that you took that power back, and that can kind of be a model in a proactive way for like how to approach that, especially coming up in the new year.
Yeah, and I know everybody, to your point, it is a privilege. Everybody doesn't have the flexibility around their schedules. So I think like the takeaway from this is, it is first of all just trying to identify like what would you like to be different, right? Because even right now, you notice I said next year, right? I identified this in like May, and I was just like, damn it, I'm just gonna have to make it. I'm just gonna have to make it. You know what I mean? That like there wasn't I for people have it for different reasons, but I had some real constraints where I was like, I'm not able to like make a full change right now. But it was really important that I identified what I didn't like and articulated, at least to myself, what I wanted to be different so that I could spend some time like noticing like what felt
Hmm.
good, what felt bad. So that's really important. Even if you feel like you don't have the power right now to arrange your schedule or have things exactly how you want them, being able to articulate at least to yourself, like, what do you want? What don't you like about the situation? And similarly, like I hired my executive assistant this year part-time, it wasn't even a request, but really the demand of my staff. Because it was my calendar was starting to feel really overwhelming. I was like double booking myself. I was missing meetings.
Hmm.
It was just starting to get really, really overwhelming. And I knew that it was only going to be more so. So maybe you don't have an executive assistant. I understand that's a luxury. But in that moment, just thinking about who do you have that is your advocate and support person in a transition or in a boundary setting, right? So, like, it doesn't have to be your executive assistant. Like, maybe it's your partner who you talk about through your day with every day. And
Hmm.
you tell them, hey, I'm trying to have no meetings on Monday, right? And that they're able to reflect back to you, hey, I know you mentioned you were trying to have no meetings on Monday. And that was cool for a while, but it seems like lately you've been having mad meetings on Monday. Right? So like maybe they're the person that like reflects that back to you, or your best friend or your mom or whoever it is that is the person who can really help you to like hold a boundary that you're trying to set for yourself and your work that has to do with your care and restoration. In that moment, it was Jada, but it's been other people for me too. And I'm sure there are probably people in your life that can be those boundary holders and reminders for you.
Hmm. Especially when you're up to big things like this. You know what I mean? it's not a small notion, and I know there's a community of us, and we're all cool, that are taking on some really, really big things. And whether it's the Ohio Rest Collective or Maroon Arts, or and we're in community, and you got Jennifer Walton. Like, you're like, okay, you're doing some big things, but what does it look like to not even like go from a hierarchy place, but like have that support system in place? Like, what does it mean? It's essential. And there's no Black woman out here, woman of color out here kicking it without that support system.
100%. 100%.
It's not
Uh,
happening.
yeah, it's not happening. Period. We
All
said
right.
what we said.
Yep. So I have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, and I mentioned this to you, socialized messages you want to reframe for women of color, Black women, women plus of color. Um, I also don't want to understate. Let's go back to this real quick. I also don't want to understate how important it is and how difficult it is to be caring for your parents and also caring for two young children. I'm caring for my parents in some ways. My dad specifically, he's in Columbus. Um, and I don't have any children. I have, I'm auntie for life. But I can't imagine like that there's sometimes it feels like there's nothing more than that. Like that's enough. So just holding that in the space, because I know there are a lot of us that are supporting our parents who are aging and in the last quarters of their lives. And it's like it's a beautiful time, like it's a really wonderful time. And it's also like terrifying, and like what's life and what's happening. Like I don't think we were built, going back to 2020, I don't think we were built for this type of grief with COVID and like active grief. Like people are actively grieving because they're caretaking. And that hasn't always been the generational thing. We finally are in places where we can take care of our parents too. So that's beautiful. There's not always multi-generational houses. So I just wanted to give you a shout out right there for that.
Yeah, thank you for honoring that. Yeah, the sandwich generation is really real, and I know there are a lot of us who are holding that. And many months back, I wrote this post on LinkedIn about just having an experience where um so my mom, who's my parent that is ill, who has a chronic illness, would just had a really rough day. And I just remember talking to her, and then like I got in the shower and I was just like sobbing in the shower, like just, I mean, body shaking. Like I was so grateful nobody was home because it felt like
mhm,
such a release. I remember getting out of the shower and my eyes were so red and so puffy. And like, I like took a picture of me outside of the shower. And then like 10 minutes later, after I got dressed, had my makeup on because I had a meeting
mhm,
that I needed to get to. And I took a picture of me like 10 minutes later. And, I remember writing a post just in that moment. I don't use LinkedIn like that. Like I kind of do. And it was a little bit weird. I was like, I want to put this on LinkedIn because I was reflecting on those of us who are really carrying those invisible um loads with us, the
mhm,
invisible grief
mhm,
that we can't express in our careers and like corporate spaces and
mhm,
workplaces oftentimes, and just like what it feels like to be carrying that type of load that's really invisible for a lot of folks. And I remember I was like, I'm gonna put this on LinkedIn because I felt like, oh, on LinkedIn, like I'm connected to a bunch of people, but it's like a lot of like second degree connections.
mhm.
Versus if I put this on Instagram, it's like all my best friends are gonna be like, girl, you okay? What's going on? Like, I was like, I don't want all that. But I was just reflecting on it. And that post ended up going viral. Which I was not expecting. It was seen over 1 million times. It was like shared by all of these different folks. And, it was really shocking to me because I just put it on and then went to said meeting that I was being asked for. But what was really interesting is like the comments. There were like 1,000 comments. And I mean, people like being like, thank you, I lost my sister like earlier
Mm,
this year, or like, I'm grieving a divorce that I haven't even talked about. I cry every day in my car. People just
mm,
like sharing these like really profound stories of like holding, their own grief, their own, their own trauma and experiences that they're like, and weights that they're carrying. And it was very humbling just to hear, like, man, the last line of that post or something was like, if you're reading this, like, you're not alone. Like, I think there are so many of us who feel this way. And so many people like responded. And it was just like, man, there really are so many of us that feel this way. So shout out to that. It is a under talked about part of the experience for so many of us.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to our parents and their parents, let's talk about some of these socialized messages that there's two more questions for you so that you know that. Socialized messages you want to reframe for Black women, women of color, women plus of color. What are some things that you have changed in the last decade or so? And you're like, I'm looking forward to, if nothing else, creating a space that can blow that up.
Yeah, so I'll share with you one that I am very much still working on, and one that has become really clear for me.
Mhm,
Um, so the one that I am really still working on is a story about enoughness and feeling like we have to earn things. And I'm not talking about like earn a living, I'm talking about earn love, earn
mhm,
our, right to be in a certain space, earn rest, that like we can only receive these things after we've proven ourselves, after we've
mhm,
proven that we deserve them. Um, and I struggle with that. I actually really, really struggle with that. This idea of always feeling like, oh, is it good enough? Or like, have I done enough to, to consider Zora? I remember in the early days, just to give an example, and it's so funny, like I look back on it now. So in the early days of Zora's house, I would struggle a lot to we didn't ask for our first grant for a couple of years. And there were two reasons for that. One is because we talked about accountability earlier in this conversation, and it was really important to us. Like, with money comes a responsibility you have to the person who has given you that money, oftentimes.
mhm,
And we really wanted to just be accountable to the people that we wanted to serve. So we specifically were really trying to be held in community, and resourced by community, so that we didn't have anybody else to answer to except community. But there came a time when that tide started to change and we really needed some more resources, and wanted to start thinking strategically about what partnership could look like. And I remember, talking to a Black male mentor who came to Zora's house for the first time. He is somebody who's like very high up in the community, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna like kind of tell him about Zora's house. And he came, and I'm kind of like telling him about what we're doing and what we're up to. And he was like, okay. He was like, well, who's funding you? Or like, who have you asked for funding? And I told him, I was like, oh, I'm gonna start. He was speaking specifically of like corporate funders, government funding, whatever.
mhm,
And I was like, oh, I'm gonna start doing it, but like I'm just waiting until like I can show like a little bit more. Until Zora's house at this point had been open for about 2 years. I was like, I want to be able to like show a little bit more, like a little bit more about like why this space is important, this and that. Like I feel like I just need to be able to like show more about success. And he was looking at me and he was like, you have a whole ass house. Like you have a facility,
mhm,
you have been running programs for 2 years. It's like, what more do you feel like you need to show in order to ask somebody to give you money or to fund what it is you're trying to do? And I remember he was just so like taken aback. Like he was like, I don't, and he really wasn't being facetious. He was like, I don't understand. Like, what are you trying to show them? Like, what is it that you think they need to see? And in that moment, it was really interesting because I couldn't even put words to it. I was just like, this just can't be enough. I don't know, like more than this. Like I can't even describe what it is, just more than what I'm doing.
mm,
And so really trying to move away from that feeling of not being enough, or
mhm,
feeling like I really need to prove myself, um, constantly. And
hmm,
that's something that I still struggle with, that I am working actively on. Something that has, been something that I've gotten a lot more bold about is failure,
mm,
and my right to fail. Like all these white boys out here. I think this, and I say that demographic in particular, because right now a big part of the work that I'm doing is around getting funding and support for scaling a really large scale multi-million dollar project. And it's been really interesting where we've had multiple experiences, even within the beginning of the campaign, where we actually had somebody tell us, and I'm not gonna like say names, but we actually had a pretty influential person tell us that, but that we were never gonna raise all this money, and that we were actually, not only were we not gonna raise the money, but we were irresponsible to get people excited about something we knew we couldn't do. And it was so interesting in that moment to like really hear that. And I remember, just saying to them, I was like, you know what? First of all, like, we're gonna go, and you don't never want to be in a meeting with a Black woman who starts with first of all. So you already know. Yeah, I was like, It's like, first of all,
Bags,
so
standing up.
listen, so I was like, first of all, we are going to do this campaign. And I was like, and there is no failure of this campaign, but let me tell you right now, like, I am not going to sit here and be told that I do not have the opportunity or the right to try something and fail at it like everybody else does.
Mm,
I have seen so many companies in this community be given second and third chances, founders, especially white men who have founded companies that have failed or had to do massive layoffs or whatever, still be lauded as these like extremely successful companies. Oh, we'll fund their second startup. In fact, in the startup community, many investors don't want to invest in somebody until they fail, because they're like,
mm-hmm.
everybody's gonna fail one or two times, and we don't want to be the investors for your fail thing. So
Right.
we want to invest in you after you failed a couple times. So
Mm-hmm.
this notion that like Black women don't have that same opportunity, that like we can't try anything unless we know for a
Mm-hmm.
fact that it is going to play out exactly how we want it, and everybody is going to be pleased, and we're going to hit every milestone, and we're going to get A+s 100%, and the only time that we get a chance to do something is if we already are assured of our success. Despite all the obstacles that we face, we are
Mm,
already assured of our success. And I've really been very vocally rebuking that
mm-hmm.
lately. And just letting people know, you know what? If it's a fail, you gonna get this fail. Like, that's it. That's what we doing right now. And even when we talk to funders, we have things built into our metrics as an organization. We talk about like meeting some of our goals, and some of our organizational goals. And I never expect, for certain ones of for certain goals that we have as an org, like our programmatic goals. I never want my staff to meet 100% of our programmatic goals, because that means we're not trying anything. We're
Mm-hmm.
not trying anything. We're not doing anything new. We're not pushing ourselves. Like, if you're pushing yourself, you're trying new things, like, you shouldn't be hitting 100%. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really an expectation to me, and my staff always laughs, because I'm like, it's a red flag if you at 100%, like, you're not challenged enough, like, and
You're not taking any
enough,
risks.
you're not taking enough risks, and so I have been really loudly proclaiming like our right to take risks,
Mm,
to try things and that we are not sure about, and to be able to be included in this ecosystem of innovation that everybody wants to talk about, and yet only white men in particular get all of these chances to be in a space and try things and dream and fail and still have the support of community behind them,
mm-hmm.
the support of funders and other community members behind them. I'm like, we getting it too. Like, period, point blank. So that is one reframing, or two types of reframing. One I'm still working on, and one I feel like I've really been stepping into quite boldly in the last like 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm. I love those. I was talking with Donna James at AALA, and we were talking about some of the differences between like AALA and like maybe Leadership Columbus, right? And I was just like, I think this is a soft landing that people will typically get. Because you'll hear stories about white cis het families in suburbia, the child may be off the chain, like low key. Like the child may be getting in accidents or drinking or smoking or whatever they're doing. But the fact that they can come home and somebody can call the lawyer or somebody can get them to court or somebody can, maybe even expunge some things or get some things off their record, like that soft landing is not something that we are accustomed to. And our dignity is inherent, right? But like that's a statement, but that's not always experienced, especially as a black woman leading anything, a woman of color leading anything. And I just think it's really important, like, to see the messages. And I love these two messages around enoughness and fail, like fail up. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna sit with those for a little bit, and I know they'll probably be helpful for others as they kind of think through what they've been taught to be allowed to do, right? Um, my last question for you. This is the fun part. So I put myself in a hot seat, and so I ask for a scenario. Retract names if applicable, but a scenario where you maybe would have done something differently, and you tell me what happened. I tell you what I would have done off the cuff in real time in this moment, where I'm at right now, and then we'll talk through kind of what happened and if you would change it, what changes you would make so people have see multiple options of problem solving.
Can I
You can make one up too.
it's not a made up scenario, but I'm wondering if can I use a scenario where I advised somebody else to do something that I don't know if I'm just gonna give you my scenario.
Yep.
So my scenario actually has to do with my husband, my partner. So he something happened in community. There was this like problematic thing that happened in community that both of us were really upset had happened. And, the problem was the person who was at the center of what had happened was very much in a position of power, has a lot of positional power
Mhm.
in our community and especially like in the spaces that my husband and I occupy.
Mhm.
And I had the opportunity, when all this happened to talk directly with that person and share just some thoughts, about what had happened, and that person wasn't super responsive. They were just
Mhm.
really defensive.
Mhm.
They were not taking any type of accountability. It really felt like they were just using the conversation to, like, appease their
Mm.
own guilt or to get, like, an okay from a Black person. And so I remember when I got off the phone, I was talking to my husband about this, and my husband's a really powerful writer, and he was like, "Yo, I wanna write an op-ed about this situation and why this is so problematic." And I advised him to not to write it.
Mm.
I felt like, you know, if he did, this person is well known to be somebody who holds grudges. And I was like, I don't think you have enough positional power
Mm.
to write this op-ed, and not come back like really burned by this.
Mhm.
And I remember after that, we had for a couple weeks, we talked a lot about what's the point of getting to the place where we have voices that would be respected in an op-ed or whatever if we feel like we can't really speak up when something happens. And a few weeks later after that happened, he came back to me and he was like, "I wish I would have written it."
Mm.
And it's very rare that I kind of am like, "Damn it, I don't know if I gave you the right advice."
Mm.
Like, I don't know if I really advised you correctly when I was like, "Don't do it." And I'm really wondering, Karen, like what you would have done in that
Mm.
moment, like how you might have advised somebody that you cared about, to handle that situation.
Ooh, this is such a good topic. This might be okay. You got the best scenario so far, and this is so real. And I want to talk about a few things before I talk about what I would have done or would have advised. Aaron and I have been having a lot of conversations because, stuff happens. Stuff happens in the community. And I am from the school of thought where I'm going to pull you aside just like you did, and have a conversation. There's not much we can do with someone's unwillingness to take accountability, or to defend and double down. We can't, there's not much we can do. We can get curious, we can ask questions, we can be kind, we can give gifts, we can do all kinds of stuff. There's not much else I can do with the unwillingness. Now, the question I have is always going to be around if it's problematic, okay, and is harm being done, right? So, with the harm being done, and you have a brilliant writer here who could write about it, which would be the same scenario that if Erin was in this position, right? And we're talking about it, she's like, I have to say something. Um, there have been so many situations where I think it was like, okay, this isn't big enough for, an op-ed or something, but I'm also the president of the board for Buckeye Flame. So we have to choose our stories wisely. And there was a recent situation where it was like, what if we have to talk about this community organization, but it's in the community, right? Like, so what conversations are in the community? Like, we're talking about the Black community in Columbus, like all the people that go to, the parties and the redo and like that age group and that demographic, like there's a specific subset of people that we're talking about. If it's problematic in that community, what do you do if that person won't take accountability in that community? And now, like, you don't want to take somebody's livelihood, right? But like, what do you do? And I think that's the thing where it's like, all right, so that's also why I'm here, right? Because if push came to shove, I would have a conversation with somebody. They normally wouldn't have a conversation with me, but I would have a conversation with somebody that could be problematic. And I have friendships where some people are like, even relationships where people broke up, and I'm still friends with both of them, but maybe one person is more problematic or something like that in the community. It gets tricky. It gets super tricky around that. Um, I'm not the one to do it, but I'm also a very big fan of people who are like, I feel convicted about it. I'm gonna be like, all right, well, maybe send the op-ed to them directly and be like, I'm gonna drop this if we're not able to have this conversation, I'm gonna drop this in whatever Columbus Dispatch, whatever. Like I have to talk about it because like this is actually curating harm. And then you have peer circles. Like there's lots of tools that you can do in those conversations, but then it's like the work is on you, right? So like you got to figure out how many casualties will there possibly be? Like how many casualties will there possibly be of some sort, whether it be emotional, physical, actual harm, or violence. And then you have to kind of take those next best steps. I think the next step after before I would have told Sheldon in this case, no, I would have probably been like, can you tell me more about what you are trying to accomplish? You know? And then maybe got a group of us together that were impacted by this and see like if there can be, the NAACP, everybody writing letters nowadays anyway after COVID, after George Floyd, but like write a letter and be like, we are going to say something about this publicly if this is not addressed internally here, you know? And people are like, make
Really,
like intervention style. Like you gotta go intervention style and give them an opportunity to make a choice and like let them know and give them a heads up. That's the respectful thing to do. I'm not one for like I'll just if it's something that happened to me or somebody's problematic and I have a bad interaction, I'm gonna probably stop fooling with you. And then if people come and ask me about it, this is how word of mouth works. People come ask me about it, I'm gonna be like, I personally do not rock with them, but at the end of the day, they're good for this, this, and this. But if they may be problematic around this. So mind your money or something like that. I mean, I'm gonna give honest advice and feedback if somebody comes asking me. But I think it gets tricky because we have so many conditions from externally that create oppression and harm. And then you have all these microcosms where people misuse power. That was important that you said power. It's like, it's so bureaucratic here, right? It's so political here. And, it's like, oh, it's going to be my word against theirs. Ooh. So I probably would do some sort of and it's not a threat. Like it just would be like, I just want to let you know, I plan to share an article about these things, or here's a look at the article. Um, is there something that you would you like to have a conversation? I know you already did. Um, but like this is going to print, or um, or we're gonna have a conversation at Ground and Grind about it. We're gonna have a town hall about it. We're gonna have a community meeting about it for everybody impacted, and you're being requested here. Like what does that look like? So, but I mean, that's a lot of work too. So there's it depends on the level of harm or what happened. Because sometimes it'll just be like you've already gone to him, you let it go, but then it's like that feeling if it happens again and somebody else new is impacted, then you're just like, damn, I could have prevented that maybe. That's the tricky part.
Yeah, I mean, you just said there's so much richness in what you said. Some of the strategies that really resonated, or what I kind of was like gleaning, was first of all, getting really clear, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like what is it that you want to happen with this? Which
Mhm,
I think is really important. I also, the idea of letting somebody know, hey, I probably gonna print this. But I think the strategy that I actually liked the most was gathering together a few people or writing it as a letter and be like, all these multiple of us are willing to like stand up, because I do think that's the other piece, right? Is like, when you're dealing with positional power, what that strategy reminds me of is like traditional like community organizing strategies, where it's like you need the many
mhm,
as part of how you take on a powerful person or structure, that like one person one to one, like you're
mhm,
not going to win.
mhm,
You're and win is really like you're not going to be heard. There's a chance that there for retribution,
mhm,
that like a lot more can happen when you're basically trying to take somebody on head on. Whereas when you kind of apply even some community organizing principles by saying, "Hey, we're going to gather a few of us who really feel strongly that like this was harmful, to say we're all kind of signed on to this letter, and like we'd like a conversation, or your presence is requested in
mhm,
this conversation." That also feels like a way of really mitigating a very real risk, right? Like I think about that sometimes, where it's like, man, sometimes you want to stand up for something, and it's not that you get to a certain place and you still need to be able to use your um you want to be able to use your voice and not always be afraid that like, oh,
mhm,
if I use my voice I'll lose my power. But it's like, why do you have power if you can't use your voice? And at the same time, there is some really thought and strategy for those of us who have worked really hard to get to a place or have a certain level of influence, that wants to be able to use that influence in a positive way, to
mhm,
also think about, man, what will be the impact in my ability to support my community, um, if I lose some of my power, influence, accessibility, in this moment, because I chose to address it in this way,
mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the old school thing. Like, I don't want to put you on blast, but I also want to let people know. And I also want to, I think a lot of times we want to be witnessed. So that's why I think that what is the outcome, the desired outcome of this? Um, because a lot of times people, double down, and really people just want to know that you heard them, that you're sorry, and that you like understand what went left, Like that's really a lot of times what people want. Sometimes they want money, and the rich people have it, so that's fine too.
They do.
But I definitely think there's something to like, what do we want to do with this, and the collective power, right? Like the collective power, the organizing power, the grassroots power. But I mean, I'm gonna say this honestly, in my process of grief, because it is a form of grief, is what I'm hearing you say, is it's a form of grief, and I've experienced it multiple times, especially in DEI, with things where we're talking about repair, we're talking about harm, we're talking about accountability, and people are just unwilling, right? There's a grief that comes from knowing someone that you may have looked up to, or that you may care about is not is not a safe space. Um, is not who they say they are, is not aligned with your values, is not aligned in your inclusion or how you treat people. Um, And that sucks. Like that, my first reaction when that happens is disappointment. Disappointment, and like I get really angry that I have to now deal with this. Like, and to the point of failing, like people are gonna fail and that's okay. But my first reaction is like anger, like now I gotta deal with this shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, not you. Like when Lizzo, I don't know what's coming out of the Lizzo cases. It got real quiet real quick. Her PR did what they were supposed to do. But when that came out, I was like, oh man, like, come
Oh,
on. I'm so mad. Like, no, no, like you were for the people. And I think that's like probably a lot of people, if they were being honest with themselves, would that's the initial reaction. Moving past that into curiosity, right? You did that. You went and had a curious conversation. They were like, and then you were like, okay. And so now you go back and have this conversation, and you're like, are we protect? Like, if it's to the point where it's like, I have to be active bystander here in some way, okay, like how can we get creative about doing that? But then it's like all the emotional, you know, all the emotional weight of that and all the emotional labor of that typically goes onto Black women, and it's just like like it's annoying.
right.
But I definitely think, calling the meeting together, and I mean some people will pull the trigger before I do, where they're like, hey, you say something or I will. And I'm like, okay, I appreciate those people in those
Right.
times, because I'm trying to be diplomatic and I'm trying to understand and I'm trying to give grace and compassion, empathy, all of things which this person obviously is not giving. Um, and it's like, how can we be in community together? We have to find ways to be in community together, but also like say the hard things. And like I think about all the and this is, I'll go ahead and trigger warning this. I think about all of the Black girls that have gone missing. I think about all the Black girls that were abused by a family member, and I'm like, nobody said anything and nobody said anything for them. And then the people that were abused are so scared to say anything for themselves that more people get abused, right? And so it's just like this cycle of like, how can we get out of this and say and be safer for each other? And if that's not your interest, then okay, maybe I have to rethink alignment, and maybe we should rethink the clout and the neighborhood, platform that you have. And I mean, at the end of the day, as a writer, people have told me all the time, if people wanted to be written nicely in your stories, they would have treated you differently. I'm like, that's so hard for me, because I don't want to, defame or slander anybody, but at the same time, you gotta be accountable to your behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for this. I was not expecting this little segment. Um,
Mm.
but I love this. I don't know if this was in the two-page.
It was in the email, but
Okay, good.
it's just a little
Good.
format template thing. But yeah, here we are.
That's okay. That's okay. So for the next one of y'all who come on the podcast, Karen does prepare you for all these things. Um, but I'm just out here, okay, just trying to make it. So I didn't know about this, and it was live. So thank you. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
this.
Situational hot seat. Thank you for such a bomb scenario. And I hope everything's okay and everyone's okay. Um, So yeah, I think that is our time. I appreciate all of your insight, all of your vulnerability and transparency. I'm always rooting for you, always in your corner. And thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If you all want to follow me, learn more, please go to zorashouse.com. I'm sure Karen will have some show notes, but zorashouse.com to learn more about Zora's House. On social media, we are Zora's House 614 on all of our platforms. And I am No One Does It Like LC on all of my platforms. The number one, not the word. So yeah, come find me. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, grateful to have shared this space with you today. So thank you so much for having me.
She's not gonna email you back though, but her executive assistant might.
Right.
So
You ain't gonna get it from me. Just, just know that. But somebody might hit you. That is, don't ask me to be in no other podcast or do anything else. But thank you for listening.
find me, but don't find me.
Find me, but don't talk to me. Don't make it weird. Like, just find me from afar. That's what we're doing these days.